Thank you very much for your attention today, and thank you for coming to the session. We're going to go back to the first one. The title of this is Building Problems to Promote Learning in an Interdisciplinary World. We were asked to give sort of formal titles, but actually I think this one is more appropriate here. Essentially, for the last 25 years, I've made my career on building problems that other people have to solve. And I'm going to be talking to you today about problem-based learning and how we can promote student learning in an interdisciplinary world. So first, to give you some grounding before I give you some examples of what I've been doing for the last 25 years, and I'm going to focus on 3 research projects that have spanned a period of time, we need to talk a little bit about what PBL is. So PBL is anchoring instruction in learning situations. It is developing problems that are tied to goals and objectives for the curriculum. So it's not just any problem, it's if you're a math teacher, what sort of problems would we have to develop to be able to promote math? If it's science, if it's social studies, if it's English, you can read through those. But the big issue here is integration of multiple disciplines in the bottom there. Problem-based learning is interdisciplinary. No other area in terms of what it is that we do, except in education, do we have time that we say from 10 to 11 we're only going to focus on math. From 11 to 12 we're only going to focus on writing and English or Shakespeare or art or music or whatever it is. But in the real world, problems occur that involve math, involve social studies, involve science, involve communication, involve technology. And so to teach people in terms of a problem-based learning environment, we're going to be promoting transfer for those people. And that's very important, and that's one of the big outcomes. So how are problems defined? 2 issues. One is when we talk about PBL and how we define them, it's time. And I'm going to talk to you today about 3 projects, some of which have lasted an hour or a day, one of which lasted a year at a time, and the one that we're currently involved in and several people in the audience here today are working on is the Global Ed Project, which lasts for 14 weeks. So problems can be minutes, days, weeks, months, hours, and in fact in Classroom of the Sea, years. They're also, chained together and linkages of those things. So it's not just throwing interdisciplinary things together to be able to say that they are interdisciplinary, but how do those things interact? So the first 3 here that we're going to talk about are Lyme disease education. I worked in the field of Lyme disease education, CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. You are currently sitting in the state, many of you may or may not know this, that has the highest incidence of Lyme disease in the entire country. Yes, it's named after Lyme, Connecticut, not limes that grow on trees. So it's not your gin and tonic Lyme, it is Lyme, Connecticut. So we're talking about how diseases are transmitted, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Classroom of the Sea was funded by the National Science Foundation, and we worked on deaf students, increasing their understanding about science, and we'll give you a little bit of data about that. It was a wonderful project. We got to go out on the RV Connecticut from Avery Point, one of our regional campuses. The RV Connecticut is a 76-foot research vessel. Beautiful. I had lots of people who wanted to volunteer and go with me in June and July, and we went out and counted seals, but we went out every month for 5 years. Not a lot of people were volunteering to go with me in January and February when there's ice on the deck and it's about 12 degrees and the ship is bouncing around. Our most recent project is the Global Ed Project. And you can see in terms of the patterns of what it is that we've worked with, but the core discipline for the Global Ed Project is social studies, science, and writing. So we're going to pose and create problems of an international incident, and we're going to ask students to use their understanding about science and to be able to communicate with others. And one of the things that's very powerful about this is that those students are writing and trying to influence literally hundreds of other students, so they're writing for an authentic audience. It's not like writing just for a teacher who's going to give you a grade and you get your feedback and you say, that's nice, I got a B, I'm good, I put that away or whatever, but it's actually trying to influence other people in a negotiation. So Lyme disease. And Lyme disease is a very preventable disease. It's transmitted by ticks. We were funded to work with the most difficult samples in the world. You'll understand that more clearly. High school students. So at a time when you're telling them, don't drink and drive, don't text, put your seatbelt on, don't smoke, no sex, no drugs, do a tick check. All right, think about that. And everyone rolling their eyes. We were funded to be able to move the knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors for students because high school students engage in many of the risk behaviors that place them in the area of being susceptible to Lyme disease. Lyme disease is transmitted by ticks, so they're out playing soccer, they're camping, they're at picnics, they're out in field trips and a variety of other things, and a tick gets on them and they're not necessarily saying, oops, I better check and see whether or not I have Lyme disease. This is a poster on Lyme disease education. You should be wearing your white socks up high, spraying yourself with tick repellent. You should be doing a lot of things, but we were trying to get kids to understand knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors, and it's a theme that you're going to see focused through our 3 examples here. So what did students know about Lyme disease? How did they feel about it, meaning are they at risk, and will they take the preventative steps? And then behaviors, will they actually do those things? So those are the things that we were looking at with Lyme disease. We moved from kindergarten all the way down to kindergarten kids, worked with teachers, and worked with public people in the area. Again, it is in the state of Connecticut. Our stuff has been done nationally, and we're very excited about that. The second project is the Classroom of the Sea project. And this is, we are working with deaf students and hard of hearing students. We have the oldest school for the deaf in Connecticut. It's the American School for the Deaf. It goes back to the 1700s. It is right in West Hartford, Connecticut. And one of the issues about deaf students is, and you can see the incidence issue, is it's the lack of clarity of American Sign Language signs for science terms. So to give you an example, if you have not had experience with deaf classrooms, the classrooms are generally smaller, usually 5 to 6 students. Keep in mind that the students are deaf, so every time the teacher turns the right on the board and is talking into the board, instruction stops because they cannot hear that. Think about in terms of now you have to sign all the scientific things that you're trying to transmit. So when you talk about photosynthesis, it would be an example of you having just to spell out photosynthesis. I'm not even going to ask you to finger spell it, but you're teaching about photosynthesis, and now you say P-H-O-T-O-S, and eventually you start saying, well, we don't want to talk about that. Electromagnetic, oh, that's another long one. We don't need to talk about that. Molecular structures, well, that's very complicated too. And so one of the things that we were trying to do, and it's important over here, is this lack of a science communication lexicon. We were developing scientific common terms that could be used in Connecticut and around the world. So we used our particular problem we were situating is taking students out and studying harbor seals in Long Island Sound. So you're looking at an educational psychologist that knows more about harbor seals than most other educational psychologists, because for 5 years we studied them. How big is the sample, or the seal colony? They migrate. When do they migrate? What stimulates the migration? How big is the colony? What impacts the colony? What attacks the colony? Their big predator, can you imagine? Sharks, all right? So sharks are going to get the seals, but there's not a lot of sharks in Long Island Sound, good news. But they do migrate all the way up to Maine, and so when they're in the open sea. So our students would be for years tracking how big is the colony, when does it come, when does it go, et cetera. And so we were looking at developing authentic materials for these students. Authentic materials is they go out on the RV Connecticut. They are doing trawls to see, are we pulling up the fish that the seals eat? So is it a food issue? Is that why the seal colony is changing? We're looking at, in terms of science through PBL environment, these students are looking at water desalinization. These are kids in terms of doing some of the water testing. So does the pH level change? Does the water temperature change? Does the salt content change? These students are studying that. And importantly, we're now putting them in a very powerful situation where they're sharing that information with other people. So one of our contacts at that time was a congressman. His name was Rob Simmons. He was a former graduate student here at the University of Connecticut, and we got him to send us a letter because he was on the Environmental Protection Committee. And so these students were actually sending their data to the United States Congress, and that was exciting for them. Primary goal, enhancing scientific literacy, giving them opportunities. We put them in a real situation. They study it for a year. The colonies are changing. They're collecting data every month. They prepare as they go out. They come back. We were actually, and I think I have a slide coming up here. Yes. In terms of we're looking at prototypes that are combining signing. We were one of the first projects that was shot on a moving ship for Discovery Channel. So one of our things was we were out there and they were looking at us. Now that might not seem like a big deal in today's world, but you're on a moving ship broadcasting kids, collecting data and signing their data back to other schools in Seattle, the Seattle or Washington State School of the Deaf, the New Jersey State School of the Deaf, the Maine School of the Deaf, putting those kids in a powerful situation where they're not just learning, they're sharing with other students, and those students are asking us questions. So it was a particularly exciting time. We evaluate, and I mentioned before when we talked about Lyme disease, knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors. It's the way I evaluate things in PBL. So what did you know about it? How did you value it, or how did you feel about it? And then what did you do? And so we looked at some of those things with our students both in Lyme disease and also Classroom of the Sea. Our knowledge, we were able to increase their knowledge about science and scientific procedures, collecting data, sampling. One of the challenges for us, how do you sample a seal colony? It might seem easy, you just count them, but the darn things don't stay still. They go underwater, so you look at one and you count him and say, there's one, and goes underneath the boat and comes to the other side. Is that a different one or the same? I'm sorry to say, many seals look the same. So our students had to count the seals and gather samples, and we would teach them statistics about, well, what's the estimate? Several different groups have counted them today. Some of them have said the colony seems to be 27, others have saying 22, 29, but it's all roughly the same ones. We know there's some error in there, so we teach them about statistics. Attitudes, their self-efficacy, a very powerful thing. Their belief that they can do science now is changing, where their self-efficacy was extremely low about science because that is one of the things that they didn't feel good about. And quite frankly, one of our outcome goals, and you heard from Rich this morning talking as the dean about what were some of the outcomes that he was trying to do for the Neag school. One of ours was get more kids that are deaf into college and retain them. It wasn't so much of an issue of getting them into college, but once they got there, they weren't able to handle the college science level courses that they were going to have to be able to pass, and so they had an incredible dropout rate. And we're talking about not putting them in deaf schools, we're talking about putting them in places like the University of Connecticut, University of Rhode Island, University of Massachusetts, wherever it is that they chose to go. So our goal was to get them in and to retain them and graduate them on time. Interest was also a big one, and then behaviors, a big one, safety and skills on the boat. The RV Connecticut, the back of it is open. Heads up, folks, if you've not worked with students that are deaf, you can't yell, hey, watch out. You might as well just say, hey, it's a wonderful sunny day. They cannot hear you. You're on a moving boat. The back end, literally, you could slide right up, especially in the winter. So you had to teach them safety procedures. They had to link themselves to the railing. They had to wear their life preservers whenever they were outside, those kinds of things. But also data collection and analysis. And then importantly, report writing, because they were sending reports to the United States Congress, and that upped the ante in terms of, I need to do a good job with this thing because, wow, congressmen are doing this. And the nice thing about Rob Simmons, he used to send us letters, thank you very much for your report. Kids would get that, they'd put it up in their classroom. Here's some of the outcomes in terms of, and these are actual quotes from our students, several of them that were in the Classroom of the Sea. Again, we ran this for 5 years, very powerful, very rewarding, changed me in terms of how I teach, because I understand better about students with disabilities and challenges, but also the things that they could achieve when you give them the opportunities. And then long impacts, live webcasts from ships. We were pushing some of the technology, we were trying new things. Again, as I said, we were on the Discovery Channel, we got written up on the New York Times. That raises the standard for everybody. Now you're dodging reporters as well as cameramen on moving ships. But we also developed a website that's still used today where teachers can type in and say, what is the sign for photosynthesis? What is the sign for carnivore? What is the sign for electromagnetic? And that make it a consistent one, across classrooms rather than a local one that might say, we'll just make one up that actually works for our particular classroom here. I learned a lot about seals. We drop over Niskin bottles, so computer controlled, we drop something over the side. You saw one earlier in one of the pictures there, and it has these little tubes. You can computer control and say at 10 meters down, open the top and bottom and take a water sample at 10 meters down. Keep it going down. Open now Niskin bottle number B, or number B. And now when you bring it back up, the kids are testing the pH value, the salt, the temperature value. So does it get colder as it goes down? Does the salt content? They get all excited about that because we're out there from about 8:30 in the morning until 3. And while that doesn't seem like a long time, in January it seems like a very long time. In July it seems like, can't we stay out here a little bit longer? Isn't it beautiful out here? But thank you. Yes, trying to get their attention. Also, when they're looking at the seals with their binoculars, for them to say, I see two, which they will say, their partner who can't hear, they have to put the binoculars down and be able to sign to them. So that was a challenge in terms of counting them. You put extra time in there and the communication, because they do it in pairs. One would be the watcher and the other would be the record keeper. So let's go on to Global Ed 2, because I'm on a stopwatch here. Global Ed 2 we have been doing for a number of years. I'm going to give you a background, but this Global Ed 2 that we're doing right now is a $3.4 million efficacy trial, and I'm going to explain to you what that is in a minute here. And Kim Lawless, the co-director of Global Ed 2, is here, and also the author of some of my slides, because she has way better taste than I do in terms of the colors and the images for this. So if you like them, they're hers. We've all heard the alarm about kids aren't learning enough about science, kids can't write, we can't squeeze everything in, American students are not doing well on an international basis. The alarm is out there. Even more alarming is some of what just general Americans know and are happy to tell you about what they know about science. 1 in 4 still thinks the sun revolves around the earth. These are not children, folks. These are adults. At the same time, we're looking at writing, and this is one of our big goals in terms of global ed. But writing proficiency of 8th graders. And we put up 8th graders because I'm going to talk to you now about data with 7th and 8th graders, which is the target group for our global ed project. But you can see that it's a very low area in terms of, look at the advanced, only 3%, all right? Below basic, 20%. In the basic area, so basic to below basic, over 70%. That's a very large percentage in terms of writing skills for the target group for us here. New mandates, we need more science, science literacy, we need more writing, lots of new mandates, not what to take out of your curriculum, but to what add into there. So things are getting jammed up. Reforms in terms of approaches to science instruction, we want more learning science by inquiry tasks, authentic, relevant, writing for authentic audiences, so not just writing for the teacher or writing for a particular task, but writing to influence other people. But how do we put all that in at a thing that's already stuffed? And this poor donkey can't get any traction here because more and more things are being packed into the school day without taking anything out. So our potential solution, and one that we've been working on for a number of years, is the sweet spot here is literally doing an interdisciplinary approach in social studies. Social studies by nature is interdisciplinary. It also involves science, it involves culture, it involves writing, and so global ed has been housed in social studies and been very, very successful for 15 years. What is Global Ed 2? Because Global Ed 2 is a little bit different. In our previous iterations of Global Ed, we have been doing things on child labor laws, we had been doing things on disease, we had been doing things on trade issues, but today Global Ed is done on science issues. And what we do is we create problems of international or global significance related to a science topic that is also related to social studies. Our most popular one, and the one that we are running right now, we literally have 3,000 kids in the simulations right now, is international global water resources. So we have kids learning about water, assigned particular countries that we will show you in terms of the layout. They are going to be learning about science, learning about social studies, topics like human rights, economy or economics, the environment, health issues, and they're going to have to be communicating with others. The goal in our Global Ed 2 project, negotiate an agreement with at least one other team in the situation. But you're not going to get to see that team. You're going to use our proprietary materials down here that are secure. It's a communication system. It allows us to trap all of that data in a database so we can see what kids say, when do they say it, who do they say it to. They're going to have choices to send it to all of the delegates out there, only certain delegates, only certain countries. So as they begin to negotiate, our database can trap that and grab that and look at the development of science terms, negotiation skills, integration of topics like human rights. Are you a country that is worried about human rights and water access, or are you a country that's going to sell water, or import water, or export water? Our targets, we've been working with 7th and 8th grade students, and this is very important. From what we know about development of attitudes, development of science, this is the time we need to get them excited about that before they start the following kinds of statements. I don't do science. I don't like science. Science is hard. All right? We're doing science in a social studies classroom because science is social studies and the impact of social studies on science topics such as water resources. Another one that we do is climate change. We're about to launch one on food production and alternative fuels. This is what our 14-week simulation. So when we talked a little bit about Lyme disease, that one was done in hours or a day. Classroom of the Sea ran literally a year at a time, and we did it for 5 consecutive years. Global Ed runs for 14 weeks. During those 14 weeks, there are 3 phases. The phases are research, where the students learn about their particular country that they're assigned. We give them roughly 18 countries, 18 to 20 countries in a simulation. We're on every continent except the poles. So we're in Europe, we're in Africa, we're in Asia, we're in South America. They play countries such as Indonesia, Bangladesh, Sudan, South Africa, Brazil, okay, Netherlands. They learn about their particular country and they learn about the problem scenario. They have to learn about water resources. We're the Netherlands. Do we have a water resources issue? We're Spain. Do we have a water resources issue? Sudan. And if we do, what is the water issue? Is it water pollution? Is it water access? Are we building dams like China, which is the largest producer of, or production group of dams in the world? All right, they account for over half of them because they're keeping the water in their country and they're using it for hydroelectric power. But if you're in India and those rivers used to run into India, you're not too happy when you turn your faucet on and you see less water running out. So those are international issues. They're not just national, they're international issues. So you learn about that. Students learning about their science concepts, their assigned country, and the other 17 countries that are in the simulation. Because the goal, negotiate an agreement with at least one other. Not all 18, but at least one other. Many of them will do it with 3 or 4. What starts the transition from the research phase, phase 1 to phase 2, is every country writes an opening statement. So while they've been researching and on their own, they're not talking to the other countries yet. They're writing, the proud country of Brazil is pleased to say, here's where we are on human rights, here's where we are on economics, environment, and health, those 4 areas, and this is what we're looking to achieve. This is where we want to go. That launches the interactive phase. Every country puts up their 4 opening statements of those issue areas, which I'll remind you again in a minute. There is no test. I'll remind you again in a minute. But that's where you start saying, who do we think we can negotiate with? Who do we have some shared interests with? Or maybe not necessarily shared interests, but trade. Are you a country that can export water or water technologies like desalinization or cleaning up brown water or gray water as it's referred to? But that's what happens and opens up our interaction phase. This is where, and we literally just opened this, I think it was October 6th, Kim, we just started. The interactive phase, thousands of kids are interacting with one another. So each classroom is a country. They act like that country. They break up in their country into the 4 issue areas: human rights, health, environment, and economics. They're negotiating so that they have to face-to-face say, Brazil can't go one way and ignore the human rights people or ignore the economics. They have to talk about that. But all the other interactions in this phase with the other 18 countries is done on our database system. So they have a double login. It's secure. Each one of them has a password. No names are used, and that's important for us, so there's no tracking and sort of that. But it drops into our database, and we can track them and what it is that they're saying, but they can start sending messages in here. And this interaction phase goes very, very rapidly. Also important for you to understand, we have someone that works for us called SimCon. SimCon is a person that's an expert in political science and also environmental science. I need you to think about an air traffic controller who's sitting at Chicago or Atlanta or any of the big air places in terms of airports and watching all the traffic. They read every message. They will push the kids back when Japan says something that seems more like Americans playing Japan than Japanese. They will push back when kids make up data about solving water resources, such as not too long ago, they came up with a $9.95 water desalinization available at Walmart, and it would solve 50,000 gallons for $9.95. SimCon types in, says, that's very fascinating. I'd like to see where you can get that because I can't find that on the Walmart website. We made it up. SimCon comes back and sanctions them. SimCon can time them out, put them in, you can't make up data. That sort of ruins negotiations. Imagine you negotiated, we're going to get all these desalinization things from Walmart, and they show up and there is nothing there. You know, but you say, well, we got an agreement. Yeah, you got one on false data. So SimCon is there to keep control in terms of play your country that you're assigned, and also play the role of the country and the science topic that we're doing. This goes on for, as you can see, roughly 6 weeks. They do 2 types of communications. One is they can send email at any time. They can log in from home, on devices, it does not matter, phones, iPads, laptops, etc. Anytime, and SimCon works because we have multiple SimCons 24/7. There are also what we call synchronous conferences that are set up only for those issue area groups. So human rights was one of the ones that just met on Monday, and they'll meet for an hour. There'll be 4 roughly questions that they're prepared for, and only the human rights kids on all of the 18 countries will meet online, sort of like an old chat room, and they'll be sending messages back and forth fairly rapidly. But SimCon is having them answer certain questions. And they'll start to probe and start to develop some of their policies and start to say, oh, wait a minute, I think we could work with these ones in Netherlands or India or China or whichever ones. Because remember, they only have to deal with or come up with an agreement with one. Then going out of this group, this phase 2 here, they're writing a closing statement. Where are we now? What have we achieved? What do we have left to achieve? Because time-wise, they're going into the last 2 weeks of global ed. These last 2 weeks are critically important. What we know about educational psychology is about transfer. And if we tell these students only transfer, you've learned lots of things that you can do, transfer, and don't give them practice, don't debrief them and give them strategies, they will not do it. This is done in 2 sets. One is SimCon logs on and holds live conferences scheduled for different groups that will talk to them about what they did well, how they can apply that in their social studies classroom in the future, how they can use that to write science lab reports, how they can write better papers for their English class, or how they can do things outside, how they could get a job, how you present yourself, how you use diplomatic language. Teachers are also trained in terms of how to do that debriefing in their classroom with the students that they have. So they're not debriefing other students, but the students that they had in there. All of our teachers are trained. They are the implementers, and this is important because you're going to see some data in a few minutes. It's not the global ed staff doing it, it's the global ed staff teaching the teachers how to teach problem-based learning. This is very different. It is not about giving all the answers. So many of our teachers are nervous. I'm the social studies teacher. What am I supposed to do when I get questions about water resources? I'm not the water person. What am I supposed to do about teaching writing? And we have a particular format that we teach writing: claim, evidence, reasoning. So what's your claim, what's your evidence provided, and what's your reasoning? And we teach them that, and we want to see that appear in other places. Our teachers get better at that as they practice. We put observers in there. That's part of what we have to do in terms of we're looking at fidelity. And that we have teachers now that are well-trained and we provide lots of supports for. This is a typical classroom over here on the left. SimCon is in the center. We have roughly 18 countries. Please keep it in here, although I see we're recording this, so it's going to slip out. But the USA plays one of the countries in there. Lots of the kids go, oh, darn, I wish I was the USA, because they think they've got that one down pat. They don't, but they think that they do. The USA is played by staff for the Global Ed Project. Why? Because we know through modeling that that person sending out those messages from the USA, who is a college environmental science major, who also is a minor in political science, sending stuff out to 7th and 8th graders to read, they all go, wow, did you see what the USA just said? Wow, did you see? And they realize they got to step up their game because they think that's just another 7th or 8th grade class somewhere. And we want them to think that. They also typically go to the United States quite a bit to pay for lots of things. So we'd like this, that, or another thing. USA, wouldn't you like to do it? And the USA is trained to push back and say, well, we want something back for that. We'd like to put an Air Force base in your country. And you go, no, 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 I just want your money. Or we'll go and say, we need favored trade things. No, no, we just want your money. USA pushes back and they go, wow, did you see the way the USA treated us? And they start to see what it's like not to be Americans. Now, we're not trying to teach them to be anti-Americans, but you heard this morning, Caitlin talking about different perspectives. These students need to take on the perspective of the country that they're playing, and they need to take on the perspective of that country when you're asking the United States for something, rather than just saying, well, I'd give it to India if they asked, so why won't they give that to us without any strings attached? Here's the teacher working with the 4 issue areas. So you see our issue areas, the USA team, and SimCon. SimCon is very important for us because it gives us control, it gives us safety, it gives us security. We have lots of supports for our teachers because they are the ones that implement for us. So we have professional development training. We trained over 60 teachers this summer, all done online. Half of our teachers are in the state of Connecticut. Half of them are in the city and surrounding areas of Chicago. Right? So they're spread apart. We don't tell the kids where those teams are. Every one of our simulations has kids from both areas, teachers, et cetera. We have curriculum guides. We have workbooks that you can see up here. We have a student workbook. It's over 100 pages long. Things that they can do, not required, but available. We have a teacher curriculum guide. Here's how to teach writing. Here's how to teach science. Here's how to support it. We have podcasts from experts in terms of the area about how to write, and also experts, look at this one, UN Institute for Water and Environment from the United Nations. 10 to 15 minutes, here's a topic, and kids listen to those. Teachers can listen to those. We have a bulletin that goes out every Friday. It's a mass production piece. It goes to all of our teachers. We also have a newsletter, like you see here, that goes to our students. We have students reading this. Every one of them gets this as an option. And then we have a website that you can go and get other materials. We have graduate assistants, some of which are sitting in this room here, that scour the news every week to be able to put stuff up on any of the countries that we're working with or what are topics. Here's just some of the quotes. I'm going to let you take a look at those. I'm certainly not going to read those to you. But these are from real kids negotiating with one another. We always have certain countries in every one of our simulations: Russia, China, India. The United States is played by us. And then we'll shuffle other ones around depending upon what our topic is. But you can see, look at, these are written by 7th and 8th graders. These are not written by college students. These are not written by professionals, right? But they're looking at issues of water resources. And if you haven't thought about this deeply, water resources is an incredible pressure issue globally, all right? We're not producing more water. We're producing lots of other ways that we can either make it unusable or we're pulling it out of the ground very, very rapidly, and then frequently polluting it. Here's our claim evidence reasoning, and while we would love to be able to teach you all about how to write claim evidence reasoning, many of our students start out with things like, we've got to do something about water because babies are dying. There's no linkage there. How did water get to babies dying? What we need them to do is to think about what is your claim and what's the evidence. And we see this growth over time from the pre-assessments, which we do before we do any of the providing what the scenario is or any of those types of things, to the post-assessment. So what is their evidence? And they deal with scientific evidence, and this has to be real evidence. They can go anywhere on the web. We do provide them lots and lots of resources, but this is not a closed system. They don't only have to use the books that we give them. They don't only have to use our website. They can go anywhere, and we encourage them to do that. And then what's the reasoning? I mean, if I passed out a pop quiz here and asked you to explain carbon sinks, many of us would be challenged at this time. Keep in mind, these are 7th and 8th graders. Writing argumentation is our strongest outcome. While we want to increase scientific literacy, and we are doing that, our kids get better at writing, and they get better because there's an audience. When they realize that there's hundreds of kids making a decision, is that some group I want to negotiate with? Not just a grade, but I want to negotiate with. That impacts how the effort that they put into it. They don't have to write on the fly. It's not something like, okay, this is our global ed time, you got to write your proposal now. They can work on it at home. They can bring it in on a Word document. They can transfer it over. They can run it through the spell checker. It's written by groups of students. We have individual writing as well as group writing. But you can see some of the impact, and our students enjoy writing better. And that's a huge piece there. Remember, this is all going on in a social studies classroom. Science content, we were able to move the needle, as we say over here on the left, in terms of looking at multiple choice scenarios, looking at science outcomes. And then differential effects, and this is very powerful in terms of, we're looking for underrepresented groups. Females are underrepresented in science. Here we are looking at, we have our greatest impact in terms of science literacy for our females. No one knows that they're females because we don't use them in terms of their names. So when they're sending emails back and forth, there's not a difference between males and females because there are no names. So there's no Scott versus Susan. There is Brazil HR2. And you don't know if Brazil HR2 is the human rights number 2 student in that group, and is that a male or a female? Science affect. Across implementations, we see increased in looking and learning about science. This is where we want to plant that seed. Wow, science is something I'd like. Remember, we're moving the needle on science in a social studies classroom. Implementation fidelity. This is very important and one of the unique things that Kim and I are bringing to the PBL literature. PBL has been studied for a long time. It goes all the way back to Barrows, who was looking at how we train medical students. It was done in Canada at McGill University, and it was very important. And it's been studied for a long time. But we're actually required, because of our IES funding, to put observers in a classroom. Those observers are observing the implementation, or our teachers implementing PBL the way that we had trained them. The outcome is, if they do PBL the way we've asked them to do, the way we've provided the support, the way that we know that it will work, the outcomes are significant and powerful. But as they drift, because we train them during the summer, and although they know that they're being watched, as they drift and their fidelity starts going down, so does the student learning outcomes. So our goal is, as we start to see them slip, we got to get back in there and sort of give them those resources to get them back up, because it is different and it is challenging for these teachers. All right? And these teachers are all the ones that we're working with are highly motivated. We vet them. They're not first-time teachers. They've taught before. We go through a screening process, and they have to jump a number of hoops to get into this thing. But it's very powerful. The fidelity is something that we're bringing to the literature that's new and different. And then we also ask them, one of the things that we've done for years is we say, tell us what you learned from this. So rather than asking them multiple choice questions and making them write, just what are the first 3 things that you learned? In the social studies classroom, 73% science content. Think about that for a second. A social studies classroom, 73% are saying, I learned a lot about science. I learned how to write better. I learned about social studies and international relations, which is a goal, multidisciplinary, different cultures, different religions, different issues, different values. And then 15% are still talking about problem solving. We're like, wow, this is a powerful thing. Currently, where we sit today, we're funded 2013 through 2017. We're in that top group right now, the first bullet. We're doing efficacy and replication. Right now, we have 54 teams that are in the middle of negotiations. Every one of those teams also has what we call a NEP, normal educational progress. So Scott Brown, if I were a teacher in there, I'd have 2 classrooms. One is going to be my global ed classroom. The other one is going to be my normal educational practice. Whatever you were going to do with your social studies class if you never met Scott Brown and Kim Wallace. All right? The easiest, best job on our research team is the randomizer. He works for about 30 minutes a year. We give him all the teachers' names, classroom A, classroom B. He sits there, rolls a dice, and says that one's A, that one's B, so that it's randomly selected which one is the global ed and which one is the treatment. Each teacher then provides us 2 classrooms because there's less variability between me being a teacher being in the global ed classroom than Zyrayas being the teacher in the NEP classroom. She's got different experiences than I do. She teaches differently than I do. So are the differences between my global ed kids and her NEP kids, is it because of what she does, because of her kids? There's less variability when I got to have both of them. And folks, we observe in both classrooms every week. Because one of the things that we've seen, the teachers that are those high fidelity implementers start to like global ed so much and PBL so much, it starts to appear in their normal education practice as usual. And we need to document that. And we need to sort of push them back and say, remember, you can start that in January if you want, but what we're doing now in terms of generalization, that's the next one, that's 2015. We'll be doing climate change or possibly food production, so we're going to change the scenario. One of the nice, exciting things about PBL is once you set it up, such a situation like global ed, you can pop different contents in it. So almost think of it as sort of a supercharger that you put in there. Take out water resources, plug in climate change. Take out climate change, plug in food production. Take out that, plug in alternative fuels. Everything else stays the same, except for some of the resources that you saw that we've spent and put a lot of time into on water resources. Those are going to have to change the food production and climate change in those, and we've run those before. And then we're doing exciting piece here is what we call the dosage study, and that'll be in 2016, 2017. If global ed and PBL really works as well as we think it is, and as well as it has in the past, why not give them a double dose? Right now, we only do it in the fall. They do it for 1 semester, and we let them go back to doing whatever they're doing. But in 2016, 2017, they're going to do 1 simulation in the fall, and they're going to do another one in the spring, a different one. So they might do water in the fall and food in the spring. That's our dosage study. Will we see the needle move even bigger or further in terms of writing outcomes, in terms of science literacy, self-efficacy about science, and wanting to pursue those types of things? We do a lot in terms of social media, so we're on Facebook, Twitter. We've recruited teachers off Facebook and Twitter. IES, which is our funder, actually asked Kim and I to come and talk about how it is that we recruited so many teachers. We hold on to them with the grip of death. You find a good teacher, you don't want to lose them. We do provide them technology. One of the things that's very important for you to understand is we provide every one of our global ed teachers 5 iPads. We give them 5 iPads to use in their global ed classroom and in their NEP classroom, because we want to look at the difference between global ed and technology and NEP and technology, not global ed on steroids and all sorts of other things. One of the reasons that we have to give iPads or some sort of device is not all of the schools that we're dealing with are fully resourced. So we're trying to make sure that there's at least 1 iPad for a teacher and 1 for each of those 4 issue areas, trying to keep that common across them. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm sorry I went long. And I'm sorry in terms of you listen to a wonderful speech like Caitlin did today, brings tears to your eyes, and then you come into here and you're talking about, boy, this guy's talking about there might be ticks on us, there's seals that are moving around out there, there's sharks after them, international negotiations, he's got a bottle of water over here, water resources. Thank you very much for your attention. Any questions? Questions? Have I been involved in any adult learning PBL situations, and how does that look? I'm going to say yes, and part of it is when we prepare our teachers. So we do our preparation for our teachers, and it's 3 days of online training. The first 2 days are anytime, anywhere, modules are up there, and they can learn about what is global ed, what is claim evidence reasoning, the science of water, and those things. And we can monitor that, which is a nice thing because we're trying to also, by putting it online, make this scalable so that you don't always have to come to a location to be trained. So that's successful. The most powerful part of this training, though, is when we take day 3 and we make the teachers act like the students. So we treat them and say, one of the important parts about being a good PBL teacher is we're going to give you that different perspective. So on day 3, simultaneously, and we did it 3 times this summer, so that we only had roughly 18 to 22 teachers each time, we assigned them a country, we gave them a scenario, and at 9:30 in the morning, we said, let the games begin, here's what's happened. A British frigate has crashed into a Russian oil tanker in the Mediterranean Sea. You are assigned one of the following countries. You need to figure out how you're going to deal with that. And you've got to figure out, is the oil moving towards me? Am I Greece? Or is the oil moving away from me and maybe I'm not as motivated to be in a rush? They had to log on as students. They had SimCon that pushed them back. We've had some very exciting times, but our teachers report like, wow, I couldn't believe 5.5 hours went as fast as it did, because we only do that for that day. But they go through the whole thing of the conferencing. They get sanctioned by SimCon, because some of our teachers are just like kids, and they don't use inappropriate language, but they might start out with, oh, we're winning this. No way are you guys winning. And SimCon will say something like, that's an interesting negotiation tactic to say that to everybody. While many diplomats may think that, stating that to everybody else sort of sets a different tone. Don't be surprised that people don't talk to you, because they've sort of isolated and pushed you out. Things happen rapidly, but yeah, that's our most powerful thing we have. And we've been approached by the United States Army to do it for essentially, because they said that if you can do this with middle school and high school students, when we have servicemen and women stationed around the world, this would give them a different perspective of what it's like to be in Turkey, Germany, Japan, South Korea, many of the places that we have bases, that when they go off the base, how people look at them and how they look at other people. So yes, Homeland Security is one of them. The UN also sent us, and we did it in Cyprus in 2007. It was our most powerful outcome because we did it with Greek and Turkish Cypriots who, let's just say there's a great deal of conflict, and they didn't know who was who, and nobody got to play Turkey, Greece, or Cyprus. And they went, wow, you're not a lot different than us. And we made them do it all in English, because everyone spoke English, but the Turks only spoke English and Turkish, the Greeks only spoke English and Greek. So those, yeah, Homeland Security, those are 2 examples. Are there any DoD schools that are involved in global at this time? There are not. There are not. We're in public schools, half of them in the state of Connecticut, the other half of them in the city of Chicago. While we can't say where they are for IRB and human subjects purposes, but one of the differences is that we're looking at fairly well-resourced suburban schools in Connecticut and fairly under-resourced schools in Chicago as measured by free and reduced lunch. But nobody knows who is who, so you don't know if Brazil is played by somebody 20 miles from here or a time zone away from here. And neither do they till the very end. And if they wish to reveal who they are, that's up to them, but never the kids' names or any of that sort of stuff. We have been in 14 states and 3 foreign countries since Global Ed started 15 years ago. People are well aware that at least by the grade 8 in Connecticut and just about every state, there is some sort of national or state testing that's going on. And do we find that there are any issues regarding doing global ed? And the answer is yes, we do, and they're positive. Remember, again, we're doing it in a social studies classroom, which to date is not being assessed by states or at the national level. Science is, writing is, math is, reading is, social studies not yet. When we can come in, when Kim and I can talk to superintendents, principals, and teachers and say, look at some of our results, we can move the needle on science and writing and still deliver your social studies content. Kids still will learn about diversity. They'll learn about geography. They'll learn where is Bangladesh. They'll learn about different governments. But we can get them to write better and learn more about science. We have people calling us. But when that changes, we believe, because we're currently aligned with the national social studies standards and the state social studies standards in Connecticut and Illinois, we will be able to replicate those studies in terms of in social studies as well. We are not hijacking the social studies content. We're enriching it. We're enriching it. Good question. Thank you. Anything else? You've been very attentive. Thank you very much, and it's wonderful to see so many friendly faces in the audience. Thank you.